Mhm.
I want to say good morning to all our guests on this beautiful Saturday, Sunday morning in New York. I don't know how it is in France, Sweden, Maine, in the UK, but I want to welcome you to our second online exhibition in our virtual gallery space. Our virtual gallery came about last winter when we had to give up our physical space due to the virus. Nancy Margolis, artists, enthusiastically embraced and supported us in this change, and we are grateful to them for that. Delphine Hogarth Lafaye is an artist that we are very excited about. She was educated in France at Arte de Sèvres in 1998 and in the UK at the University of Bristol, studying the history of art in 1995. She's had many impressive group and solo exhibitions between 2007 and 2020 in the UK, Italy, France, and New York. Delphine lives between Paris and London with her husband and two sons, and today they are living outside of the city of Paris. I want to give you some idea of how we formatted this talk. It will be 1 hour. Your microphones will be muted, and we will open it up to questions or comments from you about 20 minutes before the hour ends. Your phones will be unmuted. If you want to speak, you raise your hand and Lillian will identify you and turn on your mic. And we welcome your participation with us. So now let's turn to our conversation with the artist, Delphine Hogarth Lafaye. So I'm going to speak to you, Delphine, and ask you to give us some information about your beginnings as you moved from art history to painting. I'm going to hand things over to you now.
Okay. Well, basically, I always wanted to do art, but as you know, in this system, if you haven't done art with GCSEs, you're not really allowed to do art. So I just turned naturally to history of art because it was the closest thing I could, approach to being close to art. So I studied history of art first, but I very quickly decided that I wanted to do it myself and put my hands in it, as we say. I think history of art wasn't my real choice to start with, but it did give me a lot of grounds in having an eye for art and being able to look at it, analyze it, and even now today, I would say, position myself, what kind of art I'm doing compared to what was done before, what is being done today. If I go in a show today or in a gallery and I look at art, I will know what I like and what I don't like. I have sort of formed an eye for art in general. So even if I wasn't painting myself, it's something that I have developed as a personal trait, I think, to enjoy and look at art. And I would say that initially, getting to know art enabled me to become familiar with artists such as Matisse and Wolf Kahn, who are, I think, very powerful artists in terms of color and composition. And I think I learned a lot from looking at their work because just like a child will observe a lot to learn from adults, I did exactly the same. I think the way I proceed in art is to do a lot of observation from nature or around me or people or other artists in the past. And like a sponge afterwards, I reinterpret the way I feel about things. So when I looked at Matisse, I was drawn to the colors. So I knew that that was something that would be part of my work. And then as you grow, you move on. And I think then David Hockney taught me about composition, and Francis Bacon as well. And then Willem de Kooning attracted me because he had black and white motifs. And I thought that it was very powerful to have these little, tiny little details in paintings that drew your eye. And I've always done that myself, put a little red dot somewhere to attract the viewer's attention, or emphasize a tiny detail, because I think it's a humorous way of drawing people in just with a spot of color. I think today, the artist that I'm probably closest to in language, that was fortunate enough to see at the Pompidou Centre and at the MoMA, no, not the MoMA, the Tate Britain, sorry, in London, was Louise Bourgeois. And for me, Louise Bourgeois is the closest artist that I can relate to. Her language is definitely something that speaks to me. She draws from personal experience, intimacy, and I think my work is very feminine in that way, because it talks a lot about, life in general and my thoughts about life. Otherwise, today it's nice to enjoy living artists. So I also have my list. I won't go into that because that's my personal my personal taste on art. But I have a couple of artists who are living, who are not dead, and that I love following as well. And I think, yes, it's important to be curious about also people who are working in the flesh today, alive. And hopefully we can get more and more people curious, in artists who are living and working today.
Do you think you could name just a couple of those contemporary artists who you find as an inspiration today?
Sure. I really like Joe Bradley, and Richard Ulrich, because they're very abstract, but it's still very poetical for me. And the texturizing is brilliant. I liked Phoebe Unwin. She's a British female artist as well. And Katie Moran is quite intriguing, because you never know really what she's going to kind of dab on the canvas. And Annette Messager is a French artist who is still alive. She's a senior artist now, but she's very involved with childhood and, recreating sculptures about her memories of the past. And I think her work is very strong. And I was fortunate to meet her actually when I was very young. And she was one of the people who encouraged me to work. She said, "You've got imagination, use it, girl." And so we never met again, but that was something that really put me on my path, I think.
That's wonderful. And those are some new names to me, which I'm happy about. So add it to my list of artists.
I have a question. I don't, I'd be curious if you had any connection to Raoul, I don't know, is that how you pronounce it? The painter?
Raoul Duffy?
No, that's R-A-L-T. I'm not spelling it correctly. Lily, you look it up. I know you know the artist. But it just, like, for example, Robin Hood reminded me so much of his very heavy outline that he always did around things.
Oh, are you thinking of Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau?
Actually, I just, I'm sending it to everybody, his name, Georges Rouault.
Yes, that's our Rouault.
R-O-U-A-U-L-T.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Nancy, you've nailed me, because I don't know that one. So I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, well, I before I did go and look him up when I had that kind of reaction to the work. Mm-hmm. And some of them, like there was a portrait that particularly did seem somewhat similar in the way he approached it with the very heavy line that some of your paintings have.
Yes.
Anyway, I just wondered if that was an influence.
No, I didn't know him, but now that I've got an image
Not
of
alive, but you know what? With your history of art, your studying history of art, I mean, he definitely would have been in that category.
well, I didn't come across him myself, but
Yeah,
there's so
yeah.
many artists who
I'll be
I,
curious. Look at him, and
yeah,
I'd be curious what you think.
I'll have a look, definitely.
William,
But
what do you think?
I can see what you're talking about, and what I'd like to do now is share my screen so that we can look at some of Delphine's paintings
Yes.
more in the flesh. And Robin Hood, can everyone see my screen? Robin Hood is the painting Nancy was just referring to with the...
This is it right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually Riding Hood. Sorry, I have to.
Yes.
Sorry.
People will understand what I'm going to say, but it's definitely a painting that that was amusing to make because it's got a certain dialogue. There's a kind of a dialogue between the wolf and the Riding Hood persona, and the tongue is sort of out of the wolf's mouth because it's on the side. So it's humoring and mocking a little bit the figure of the wolf. And I mean, symbolically, I thought it was an interesting piece because we all know that the story of Riding Hood is a symbol of puberty and you know, the child becoming a teenager and everything. And I thought that it was a nice way for me to, as I'm also entering those years with a son who's in puberty right now, I wanted to do a version of what I thought was that space of time for a woman. So I think these stories that we read to our children are very meaningful, and I wanted to paint it. So I put my own interpretation here on this story.
And that reminds me of some of the themes you touch on in this painting, Playground Games. And I'd love to read a quote by you about this painting, Playground Games. You say, "The need for tales, superheroes, security blankets, small toys, cars zooming around, and dreams are all logged into this piece to capture the eclecticism of what is essential to develop small people's imaginations." So were these works really inspired by your children and being in such close quarters with them, especially during these quarantine months? And
absolutely. I think that when you become a mother, you also revisit maternity and what, you know, the massive responsibility it is. And I think that these sort of tales and stories and the games you can play and those toys and those security blankets, they're all here as helpful tools for a mother to use to you know, bear the journey of educating a child. And I think that I don't find that a lot of men talk about that in their paintings. I think you know, it's about time women allowed themselves to talk about these subjects, because it is part of a woman's life. It takes up a lot of space and time, and I think that it's, you know, I gave myself that voice. I think I allowed myself to talk about childhood and what a child might need to feel comfortable. And in this painting, well, the POW is very much about those comics that we can find when you're a child, and indeed the little cars are upside down. And I think children are much more capable than we are adults to accept things that are probably not completely real. I mean, a child might look at that. I know a lot of children who saw that painting really like it because it's got things that are more part of imagination than reality. We're not going to find cars going through a figure's head, but they will understand that it's about dreams, and they'll straight away identify that the figure is dreaming, and that's fairly interesting. And in the actual tree, there's a wolf hidden. I mean, if people look closely by, there is a wolf that's hiding, and in a cubicle way he's built into the tree. So I think it's always funny to bring humor and play with this spectator, because for me the main importance of painting is to enter a conversation with the spectator. I really feel that that's my way of creating a dialogue with people. So if they can go through the wolf and then wonder what that is about, then they'll probably start thinking about the painting and what that's about, and little puns, little clues here and there who can allow the people to embrace the theme of the painting.
That I was going to bring up your use of humor in your paintings, and you said one of your quotes is, "The process of creating a painting becomes an insular time capsule in itself, a reflection endured physically, emotionally, and with humor." So you just touched on that a little bit, but you use humor as a way to make your paintings more accessible or reach your audience and pull them into your works.
Yes, I think that I like to talk about things that are quite serious, and I think that when you use humor, it's a good way to make it more accessible. And I think I do like a good joke as well. I am quite a silly character at home, so I have both in me, the serious side and the humoristic side. And I think that, for example, in this painting, it's with Eve, the one you just pulled up on the screen, it's definitely very serious, because I did that while there was the movement to Me Too, and it was how the body of women is being seen, generally speaking, by society and men, and how we are constantly looked at in the flesh. And I put the body of this woman on a table, just as if she would be a fruit. And in a way, it's a little bit provocative and rebellious, but because it's a beautiful piece, and because she's got a nice classical pose, I think you make these little efforts, and those little how can I say this, humor is going to kind of make it more easy for people to digest, I think. Whereas if you do a very provocative violent painting, I don't know if everybody would like to have a look at it. But you can talk about serious things with humor and poetry, and that's what I find.
And one thing that strikes me about this painting in particular is it really references art history. At least to me, I immediately think of odalisque paintings and, the classical idealized woman. But as you said, the fact that she's, to me, I interpret this as a kitchen, and she's on the table, and it kind of brings it down to earth a little more. And it does have this humorous quality, which I appreciate in your work. And I think your humor is really working well in this to, make it more accessible.
Yes, thank you. Well, you've described it very well. She's on a kitchen table, so how ridiculous is that? I mean,
right.
But in a way, it's still quite, I think people immediately will question, why is she next to a bowl of pears?
Mm-hmm. Right.
We all know what pears are, so in the language of men. So I think it's quite pertinent. Everything is chosen meticulously with reason. It's not left completely, it's not just a coincidence.
Right.
But then people don't even have to analyze that. They can, it's for people to see how they want to dive into the painting or not. That's what's nice, I think, to have different levels.
You mentioned something with this body of work about how you have these meanings behind each one, but you encourage people to interpret them in their own way, and they can see what they want to see, which I think that works really well. And I think people can derive different interpretations from your paintings. But going back to that quote about your process, I like how you describe your process as something physical. And I think that really comes across in your paintings. You use many different materials. Your paintings aren't normally just oil on canvas. They include collage and stamps and ink, acrylic, pastel crayons, wax. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your multimedia process and how you decide which materials will go on which paintings, and if they're related to the subject matter at all. Just go into that a little.
Yeah. Well, I've always been quite versatile in what I used.
Mhm.
I mean, 20 years ago when I started, I was doing children's stories, for fun, and I was already using collage and all sorts of inks and watercolor, and I've never limited myself to one medium. I was also doing pig rings with, wine bottles and things like that. I was doing patchwork paintings with sewing involved. So right from the beginning and until now, I've always used different mediums. And for me, even though I was going on canvas, I didn't want to limit myself, because what I find interesting is to create layers and texturizing the painting. I'm not interested in doing classical perspectives. So to texturize and give it different, a different opacity or a different transparency is what interests me. And I find that when I start a painting, it's more like a lab work where I'm exploring, and
Mhm.
therefore to limit myself to one thing is not going to be satisfying. I have to test and to free myself, and and basically I have to feed on different mediums to create my textures. I think also maybe because I didn't have such a marginal, I mean, I was kind of, I've always been a little bit on the marge, I think, of things, even, growing up and everything. So for me, I don't necessarily follow the rules,
Mm. Right.
except when I'm, in a shop and I have to queue to pay for my groceries, or if, I'm very civilized, but I don't really like following all the rules. So I think it's the only freedom you also have as an artist, because there's so many constraints that if you're allowed to talk about what you want to talk about and use the mediums you're interested in, then you're already enabling yourself to address your language and your conversation with the audience.
Right. That makes sense. Um, One material I've noticed that's recurring a lot in this body of work is postage stamps.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I didn't really see that in your last body of work. So I was wondering if you could just cue us in to what you were thinking about those, and do they carry any meaning for you?
Yes, they carry a lot of meaning, because although in my last show with Nancy Margolis, I didn't have the stamps. I had a bit of sewing on a bird,
Right.
that on one of the paintings, but I didn't have any stamps, that's true. But I have used them before on several occasions. And I think it's a tiny little piece of paper, and there's a lot of detail put into the picture in a stamp. So in themselves, they're absolutely amazing stamps if you think about it. I mean, I'm very drawn to stamps in general, and I don't know how long we'll have stamps around. I think maybe in the future we'll just have, those automatic stickers that people are starting to put on packets. So they'll probably become artifacts in themselves in 50 or 60 years. So I think that if somebody has a painting with stamps on, they've probably got something that's actually going to be an antique at some point.
Right.
But I think the composition in a stamp is quite fascinating, but also they evoke traveling and communication, mainly communication. And I think in House Strike, the painting you just pulled out, there's this is a sphinx made out of stamps, and because it was done after the quarantine and the isolation, the sphinx is addressing the egg-shaped figure to travel in different ways, and the stamps are here to symbolize the traveling and the communication. And obviously, when you can't kiss the people you love and you can't go close to them, the only way is words and pictures.
Mhm.
So I thought that it was a good way to introduce the stamps in this painting. I wouldn't put them just anywhere for no reason, but the hot air balloon painting you pulled up before and this one have the stamps, because with the confinement it seemed pertinent to use them. This one is definitely worth using, because I was thinking, well, you know, with a hot air balloon, you've got a basket, and the basket is going to protect you. You're going to be protected in that basket, just like a puppy is protected. But then the hot air balloon is going to take you up in the air, and the stamps are there to show you that you're going to travel, you're going to go up. And I thought that with the virus, you know, contaminating people through the air, if the hot air balloon can take you up to an air that's pure, where you're not going to be contaminated, it was a nice way to escape and to be far away from the virus. So that's how this painting was done. Primarily, it was yes, it was completely linked to what we were living.
Right. Got it. And you're bringing up my next point, which is I wanted to talk about the fact that you created a lot of these paintings during the COVID-19 lockdown. And one theme that really stood out to me was the theme of habitation and home life. You have 3 paintings, Wild, House Strike, and Chlorophyll Home, that depict physical houses. And then you have a couple other paintings of interiors, so these still lives. And I was curious if you could talk about how isolation and being quarantined affected or shaped your theme for this exhibition, or did it change your process? Just if you could talk about working during isolation.
Okay. I think I was lucky that a lot of my work was done before isolation, actually, okay, because isolation was so hectic. I mean, the whole of the outside world stopped and was slowing down during quarantine, but not for me. Actually, it was a faster paced life because I had a husband at home, children at home, homeschooling, hardly any time for myself to paint. So I was able to, it was quite interesting because I had the before the quarantine, where I was able to talk about those paintings that we looked at, the childhood theme, and also Lamp, for example, that's a still life, and a few other ones. And then with this painting, Wild, that you pulled out, this is, yeah, that's the still life painting Lamp that was done before. And with Wild, it's quite funny because it's right in the middle of the before and the after, because when I initially did this painting of a house, I was more thinking of the house as a symbol of the body, like actually your body is sheltering your thoughts and your identity. And so I was creating, you know, how inside of every human being there's a jungle of emotions and thoughts, and it's a very active, we're very active kind of tools, I think, for humanity. So my house was initially about who we are deep inside, and slowly, when I finished it on it was finished just before the confinement. So suddenly I realized that it had another meaning, and that maybe I was also inspired by all this atmosphere, the build-up we were slowly going towards a confinement. And I think that without realizing, I was probably already painting the fact that we were all going to live in our houses for 3 to 4 months, and you know, only being able to shop once a week, and filling in papers to walk our dogs and all sorts of things. So I think this painting is quite interesting because it was the painting that symbolizes before the confinement and then after. And then the other ones are really after and are more obvious in that way. But this one is the house as a shelter. In this painting, the house is going on strike because it's worked too hard, and you can see the target on the house, because the house was obviously, you know, the protection for people, but also the houses can be threatened because it's overworking. And I think the figure, it was nice to put a figure face in the painting, because I think we were all kind of a bit bloated after the confinement, with hair going all over the place. And I thought it was fun to put the lips of the persona into an envelope, because that, you know, you can't talk physically to the people that you'd like to be close to, so it has to go in an envelope to go and reach the ears of the people that you want to be close to. So the whole I think the house, I looked it up at the time because I was interested. I think the Latin root of the word house is the same as the word human being back in the days. So it's very interesting to see that it's the abiding shelter of people we are close to and that we love. So to have a house on strike is a pretty strong comment on how the confinement, I think, affected people.
For sure. And when we were just emailing before your exhibition opened, you wrote me a few words about this painting, House Strike, and you said, "A house has put on her yellow shoes to go on strike. After the worldly confinement, she has worked around the clock nonstop and is leaving for a deserved break." And
Yes.
I love that you not just humanized the house, but it's also feminine. I mean, you're referring to her as she, and there's something really interesting about that to me. But it feels very meaningful that you're imparting human qualities on this house, something which has been protecting us through COVID, but in general as well. And then, yes, she has been working so hard to keep us all, safe and healthy, and it's been too much, and now she is picking up and is ready for a break.
Yes, I think even a place of shelter needs a break. I actually felt that when we left for our summer break as a family, that the house, I actually really thought that it was having a break. I thought, right, this is it. She's going to be a little bit more calm.
Right.
It's just a funny way of thinking about these kind of things. This one is a painting I really love because it's once again referring to the house shelter, and the colors are very kind of pastel-like, and I think because the house was where you could breathe the oxygen without the virus, because if you went to a supermarket, you would be threatened to catch it. If you were, there was all these places that were kind of dangerous. So in your house, you felt you could breathe safely and that you were okay. So I called it chlorophyll house because chlorophyll is oxygen. And I put a tree there because obviously we need the trees for oxygen. So it was pertinent to have it close to the house, and most houses do have a tree next to them. And I just thought that it was interesting to make a little black kind of entering room, because once you enter into the chlorophyll house, you can breathe like a lung. And I thought it was interesting to have these scribbling circles around the house, a little bit like on fish, where the fish have those holes for breathing. So for me, it was all about breathing, and yes, it's all connected to what society is living and going through, obviously.
Got it.
It's I think the colors make it, they're all kind of fresh. So there's that duality.
For sure. Do you think this body of work is sort of a departure from what came before? Did you feel like you were taking any sort of risks with this body of work, or challenging yourself to experiment in ways that your previous paintings did not? Or I'm just wondering how you think of this body of work, Outskirts, compared to, say, your first show with NMG or paintings you made prior. Did the process feel different, or were the themes more challenging?
I think there's a common thread with everything I've done since the beginning, going right through today, because there's, in the actual texturizing and trying to talk about life and trying to be a truth seeker, I think is what I try to do. And I've always had that common thread, but I do think that because I'm changing and I'm growing, and the sedimentation of the years is coming upon me, so obviously my work is also changing with me. And I think that the dialogue that I have today is not the same as 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 5 years ago, when I started painting, you know, my Pac-Man, that was a different theme. The women were a different theme. They were more about women in their 20s, 30s, how, you know, how we what is our place in society, what's it going to be like for women. This is Outskirts is really about habitation, identity, homes, shelter. So I think it goes with being 40 and growing up and having a different perspective on things. I think there's always stages in your life where you do also move on yourself, and so the work obviously is going to, in terms of themes, move as well. But there's all, but I think that it's recognizable. I think, you know, I haven't changed style completely. I'm not like certain artists who go from, you know, complete abstract to figurative work. I mean, there's a common thread, I think. But Outskirts is interesting because even in the show, there's the before and the after COVID. So I think it's an interesting show in that way because it all fits in well together. But you can see kind of a year of, you know, the life. How can I say it? Yes, the life of somebody who's lived for a year and everything that's come through. I think Soup that you've just pulled up is painting about tradition. So that was before COVID, and it was about you know, fitting in the theme of what the children need to grow up. And Soup with Riding Hood and with Kiss were a triptych that worked well together to talk about these roots that children need to grow up. So I think obviously now I don't want to paint the same thing today. I think I'll move on to something else again. But it's always about your main concerns. I think what touches you on a personal level, but also, you know, individually, but also a group. And I think that you can't it's impossible not to take in account what the group is living, and it's impossible to forget about what you feel, how you feel about things. So I think the painting for me works. That's my opinion. But the painting for me works if it talks about how I feel and how a group feels.
Delphine, I would like to open up the discussion with our guests. So if you have a question or you want to make a comment, just identify yourself and Lillian will remove the mute on your mic.
And also, Gail, let me unmute you. A second. Hi, Gail.
Hi. Hi, Lillian.
Gail, excuse me, just identify who you are and where you're from. I think it would be nice to share that.
Sure. I'm Gail Spain, and I currently am on Peaks Island in Maine, and about to have a first solo show with Nancy. And so I thought I'd come and listen. Delphine, your work has really a palpable life force.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like I can feel it coming at me.
Oh,
and so I kind of have two questions. One has to do with this idea of a soliloquy. You know, a soliloquy is like you're driving in the car, there's no one sitting next to you in the seat next to you, and you're talking out loud.
Yeah, you're
right?
talking to yourself.
Yeah. So talking out loud regardless of anybody that's there. So the work comes across to me a little bit like a soliloquy, even though I know.
It's interesting you mention that, because I think my art is quite talkative. I absolutely agree with that. I will not refute the fact that it's talkative work. I think it's a platform for me to express myself, definitely, to express my thoughts. Yeah.
So I the way that you make your paintings, it's like you stack stuff. You used the word jumbling, and your stacks, they go vertically, and they also go in and out, like your layers, visually and physically. I guess it's a comment, but I'm interested to hear you talk about the stacking. I see that stacking and jumbling as your soliloquy, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very true what you say, and I think you've definitely nailed it, because I like to work the layers like a thin skin. I don't like it to be too thick, but it still has to have different layers. And it's interesting for me to go and get what happened underneath sometimes, and to scrub. I think sometimes I like to use tools. I have different tools in my studio that I like to rub or scrub or spread, or sometimes I have to wait for things to dry and then come back and see what happened, or if it can work. And I think I actually like to create a visual effect by making some areas quite opaque and then some areas a bit transparent, and that takes a lot of time. I have to work my layers quite a lot to make it interesting, definitely.
Yeah, and that word time, it's like like in the soliloquy where you can talk about whatever, like stream of consciousness, that collapse of time is present there with the way you make your work, for me.
Ah, that's interesting. Yes, that's a nice way of putting it. I think definitely when I start the painting, I'm kind of unconsciously, how can I put it? I think that the most interesting thing, I think I know what I want to say now. I write a lot. I write all my thoughts and ideas, or things that have touched me or intrigued me, so I have loads of books where I write my thoughts and ideas. And then when I start the painting, I, like you said, the stream of consciousness, I let things pour out. I have to let it pour out and see what has stayed with me with all the research. That's what interests me, what's going to come out. Then you also surprise yourself, so it's quite exciting.
Thank you.
I'm going to unmute Sophia. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Second. Hi, Sophia.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sophia Ainsley, and I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm an artist. I was wondering if you could talk about femininity. I'm interested in that idea of femininity, and I was curious if you always identified with that idea, or was there a time where something happened and this became a new concept in your work? And how did you come to that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking back over the 23 years of painting, so when did I start looking at this? I think that femininity is definitely a theme that I've treated and looked at and still look at and probably will look at again. I've always felt as a child, I've always felt that there wasn't a lot of room for women, actually. I mean, I know it's very today and very fashionable today to say that, but I did feel as a child that, I personally wanted to actually be a man signing my paintings when I was younger, because I felt that as a woman, I would not be able to carry them, that maybe I wouldn't be looked at. I thought maybe men had that more of a presence than women had, and that maybe women were not as intriguing. And then I discovered all these wonderful female artists and understood that there's absolutely room for everybody and different forms of interpretation. and that to work in a feminine way is just as powerful as with your feminine instinct, is just as powerful as a masculine one. I think what happened is sometimes people say little things to you and they don't realize that it's going to stay with you. But I remember quotes like, family dinners or dinner parties with friends, and people saying, oh, we've got a lot of men, in the history of art, and me saying, well, why aren't there enough women? And people saying, well, that's because men are better, because women create children, so they don't need to create art because they've got their body as already creating other things. And I couldn't believe my ears. I think I was relatively young, and I thought, no way, this is not happening. We're allowed to create on all levels, human beings, but also definitely create art that's pertinent for society, because we are also part of society, and we also have our own eyes and our own voice. So for me, femininity, even if I don't always paint women, it's always there as something quite strong, because I think that there needs to be more room for us in general. But that's been a point of view since I've been 16 or a teenager. I've had a lot of arguments with people with that subject, but today it's different. Things are evolving, so I'm interested to see what's going to happen, and I'm happy that I'm actually alive to see change happening. And I'm also bringing up my boys to be people who will embrace and enjoy femininity and the way females see the world. That's very important for me, that they understand the world with women and not separated. I think that would be great. But in terms of themes, I did a theme when I was 23 on the body of women and how women are, how they feel in their skin when they're looked at, and what can be their role in society, the isolation sometimes you can have as a woman starting out in life, in jobs. And I did feel that myself. That was a personal experience, and I did try to translate it in my paintings. The vulnerability when you're not somebody who's too boisterous, or if you're a little bit more discreet, it's sometimes a little bit hard to be heard. So I think my way of doing it and talking about those subjects is with images.
Thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Such a broad subject. I mean, that could be a dinner party subject, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody else have a question for Delphine or a comment about this exhibition or a particular work? And also, Delphine, I was going to ask if you have any other thoughts that we didn't touch on. You can totally, have the floor to, bring up anything else if you wanted to mention something about your show.
Well, I think we've covered quite a lot, but I think the only thing I could say is I think that art is art is not about art. I think for me, art is about life. So I think that that's probably what would exemplify the way I like to approach my work. I know I'm not yet very well known in New York for the moment, because this is my second show with Nancy Margolis. But I think that New York is, an interesting city to work with, because there's so many cultures. There's such a versatile, background of artists, that I feel actually very happy and glad that I've had that experience. So that's maybe a few words about that. And I think the times we're living in are a bit complicated right now. I think people are quite Some people are worried and anxious. Some people are delighted because they see change. I think it's very difficult to know how we all feel, because there's not just what's happening with this virus all over the world. There's also a lot of other subjects on the table with, like we mentioned, the Me Too movement, and there's a lot of political things. I mean, in New York, you've got the presidential elections as well coming up. I mean, that's, you know, there's a lot going on. And I think that there will be a lot of inspiration for future work. I think that's what I can say.
We do have a question from Veronica. I think you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Yeah, hello. It's not like a question. I just wanted to share something with all of you. We were talking about femininity, and we are a lot of women here. I have the privilege to follow Delphine works the last 17 years. I have behind me the first painting I bought to Delphine 17 years ago. And I heard many things in what Delphine said and all your testimony that that touched me, because for me, Delphine is someone like, it's like a magician. She's creating a world in each painting, a world with different level, different layers that you can understand in very different ways. And even with the paintings that I work with like 10 years, I can have a look at it and I will understand something that is new, even if I had this piece of work for the 10 years in front of me. So for me, it's a privilege to follow the Delphine works from all these years. And I think it is very important for women, the way she expresses herself, and regarding how the woman, the children, husbands, also pets. So it's like a word, and she can share it in very different way with very different kind of people. And I'm always a fan. So I just wanted to share that with you, because it is very precious for me to know Delphine and to follow her work. That's all. I ask her many questions, but in different moments. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Lillian, I would just like to say a couple of words to
Sure.
Delphine.
Yep.
Delphine, I am so pleased that you were able to do this show, and I loved what how you talked about your work, and it enriched my understanding of it. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Thank you. It's been great, because you have allowed me to be completely free in my themes, and therefore it was fantastic for me to work knowing that I had the possibility of just delving into what was meaningful to me and what I wanted to talk about. So that was great.
Well, I hope we'll see you soon.
Yes.
We'll touch each other and touch each other inside. I want to thank you all for coming to this talk. We've been doing these talks since I've had the gallery in New York, and I really love them. I learn something every time. Thank you for coming, and I hope we'll see all of you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lillian. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you to everyone who was there for the talk. Thanks to everyone.